Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow me on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview film professionals to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Cinematographer Denson Baker, whose work includes The Color Room, The Luminares, and the reshoots for Get Out. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Thanks for having me.
I want to ask you about the reshoots for Get Out. How did you get involved with Get Out in the first place and get on for the reshoots?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the cinematographer of Get Out was Toby Oliver, who's a fabulous cinematographer, and he's been a friend of mine since way back. We've known each other. We kind of were oscillating in the same circles back in Australia quite some time ago, and we always kept in touch, and we would always follow what each other was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an opportunity where I was asked to be a camera operator for him on Insidious Chapter 4,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a great time. We did two days, which I don't often get to operate with other DPs, which is actually something I'd recommend to other DPs as an opportunity to see someone else at work. So which was great, and it was great reconnecting with him. And when that wrapped, he called me up and said, "There's this project that I've shot with this guy Jordan Peele." And I said, "Oh yeah." I mean, at that point, Jordan
Mm-hmm.
Peele wasn't quite at the level of fame and notoriety that he is now. He said he couldn't do it because he was on another project that was shooting at the same time as the reshoots, and asked if I could step in and fill in for him, which was a brilliant opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's not something I've had to do often, but it's really interesting stepping in to continue another DP's work, because you want to obviously honor that, and you don't want to start shooting something that looks completely different.
Yeah.
But you also need to rely on your own taste and style and instincts. So had to incorporate that into my approach. And I got sent a rough cut of it, met with Jordan a number of times, and he was very specific of what he wanted to achieve in those reshoots. They had a new ending, they had shot a new beginning, and Toby had a lot of input into how it should be shot, and stepped in and did it. And
what were some of the moments you had to reshoot?
There was a few, because it wasn't actually a big budget film, even though it was
Mm-hmm.
incredibly successful. It was done on a very tight schedule. So there were scenes which that the team felt had been rushed when they had to shoot them. They didn't get the opening scene quite how they wanted, didn't quite set the tone in the way they wanted to set the tone. And I think Jordan had this idea all along, which they didn't get to do when they shot it, was that it was much more of a Halloween-esque Steadicam shot, walking through the suburban streets. So that was something that needed to be choreographed and have the time to rehearse it. And I mean, we had a couple of days leading up to it, which is a great way to do your reshoots, where we had a week where we rehearsed some of the scenes. Others were some pickups that were in Catherine Keener's death scene. There was a few other little fight moments that needed to be sort of worked on a bit more, because they had an opportunity to have another go at them and perfect it. Plus, there was a change in the idea of how they were going to finish the film. So there was a new ending that was applied to it. So I got to shoot that as well.
Now, whenever I talk to editors, we talk about tone, and they always are like, well, it comes, a big part of it comes from set. And when I talk to people on set, they're like, well, a lot of it comes from this department. And they sort of keep passing the buck, not in the sense that they're passing the buck, but in that it's such a collaborative, it's important to be collaborative to get the tone right. So how did you work with the different departments on the reshoots to get that tone right for the opening?
Yeah, well, for the opening itself, I was using Artemis, and we rehearsed it, and actually literally shot what we wanted. And that was looked at by, whether it was the producers, Jordan himself, and the editor, all had a look, and we were like giving notes, and had a chance to try those again. But with some of the fight scenes that we picked up moments from, we actually had fight rehearsals in Los Angeles before we went to Alabama to shoot those actual scenes. So those were rehearsed, and I shot those on Artemis as well, and they were cut together too, to see how they worked, and then we had the angles that Jordan wanted. So, I mean, that's the ultimate way of doing a pre-visualization. Really, is to have a chance to actually shoot them.
Now
I mean, I was just going to add. I think that's a really, it's an interest. I've met a number of other producers and other filmmakers now that do see the value of reshoots and see them not as we've made some mistakes and we need to fix them. It's more, once you're in the edit suite, you realize that there's a few things you could do differently, or that might help the edit, or you have some new ideas that emerge from the edit. And I think it's really smart to budget for that and to have that in your plan, to have a chance to do a week or a few days of pickups.
Well, it's interesting because it's, I think you're right. Like I would say in the last 20 years, maybe, originally reshoots, at least the perception outside of the film industry was like, oh my gosh, this film's in trouble. Whereas now it's like all the Marvel films are reshooting, like all the, like everyone's like, the people who care and want to make the best story are like, let's give ourselves a couple extra reshoot days or a week to pick up something.
Yeah, well, I think that's why the name reshoot sort of applies that it's redoing, whereas if it's pickups, it's shooting something new or another moment that you didn't get a chance to do. And I think it is about perception. And I mean, I would encourage every filmmaker that I'm working with to keep that in mind, that if needed, have that opportunity during post to actually pick up a few more elements.
Well, and it's interesting because with all this talk about virtual production, post is now moving earlier into the production and cutting, whether it's an animatic or what have you, like what you guys were doing, some test shoots and what have you, assembling it beforehand so you can prep it for the shoot now. So it seems like everything's sort of shifting in the industry. Yeah,
it's a lot heavier in the prep than in post-production. Yeah, well, that's the other thing, because post-production is sometimes seen as a time to fix mistakes, or it's correcting things. But that pre-planning can avoid so much of that.
Yeah. Now you also, like when I looked at your work, so like Ophelia, the Luminares, the Color Room, they're all period pieces. So what would you say is some of the challenges that you face when you're shooting a period piece?
Yeah, I mean, I never wanted to be pigeonholed, but there has been a period in my career where has been a lot of period films, which I actually really love doing. And I mean, it's also, I've done an ancient Rome story. I've done Victorian England period. I mean, I kind of look at it that, I mean, all films in a sense are period films. Some are set in the present, some are set in the future. But the period films that I've done, and being various different times in history that they've been set. I mean, one of the first things I will often do is look at that period, whether if there's photographs. If there isn't, then it's paintings or it's history books, and just start to get a bit of an idea of the place and the time, and particularly the light sources that were used at the time, whether it was domestic or the event lighting, and which I find so fascinating, just the way that light and lighting units evolved over time. Most of it starting with practicalities of what was or economic reasons, or what was technologically available in those times. But that is sort of where the lighting will begin for me, is what were the light sources of the time. I mean, it's been interesting too, because I have recently had a couple of occasions where I haven't got a job because a producer has said, well, he does good period, but can he do a good contemporary setting? Which I mean, my feeling is that if you can do great lighting in any period, you can do great lighting. But I've since now done some detective crime drama series and various other things, just so I can show that I'm not just the period guy.
It's frustrating because I hear the same thing from editors and colorists and stuff, where it's like, oh yeah, he's really good at comedies, but we haven't seen him do a drama. And it's like, well, it's storytelling ultimately, right? But
it is a tricky thing because I mean, often, and I can understand it. Often, studios and producers or execs they want some confidence or some reassurance that what they're looking for is exactly what someone has been able to achieve before, and then say, "Well, I want what they do."
Yeah.
So I can understand that to a degree, but yeah, it's something that's hard to break that perception sometimes.
And no one's come to you and said, Kubrick used candles. Can you do that in his period piece? No one's come to you and said that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, Barry Lyndon's kind of set the standard for candle lit scenes. So absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're fortunate. We work in a time we've got much faster and more sensitive sensors now than what Barry Lyndon was. I mean, I can't actually remember. It was very low ASA film stock. It might have been 50 or 100 ISO, so they needed a lot of candles. And it's interesting when you watch it now, you can see that a lot of it is designed around the technical fact that it has such a shallow depth of field. I mean, I've spoken to filmmakers that said that there were certain scenes where they had a C-stand at the back of the actor's head that they would be resting against, so they didn't lean forward or back to
interesting,
get out of focus, as it was that precise for some of the scenes in there. But now, we're working with sensors that can shoot very easily in candlelight.
You also have done a lot of music videos, and one of the things that I find interesting about music videos is I feel like it's a ground where you can experiment or push the medium. Have you gotten a chance in any particular music videos to sort of push that limit, or what are some of the challenges in music videos that you've found?
Yeah, well, not necessarily push that limit, but sort of wanted to achieve something that you wouldn't necessarily do in a drama or a more commercial production. I mean, I've dabbled in various different styles, whether it was super slick and fashiony to something really gritty and dirty. I mean, there was one music video that I did and absolutely loved and it wasn't a new technique. I mean, David Fincher was doing it with some of his music videos, but just working with film stocks and just really pushing the film stock, not just pushing it in the lab. Oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Sorry, yep. Sorry, it disappeared for a second. Where I shot on 16 millimeter and got to really with it was sort of at that period where digital hadn't quite come in or taken over, but the post houses were really pushing to still use their telecine machines, and they could see that that film wasn't going to be the same popular medium. So it was actually a great opportunity to get a little bit more film stock than we could usually afford, and to put it through a telecine, which the post house didn't mind us twisting the film stock through the gate and scratching the film as it was going through the gate, and having flecks of the emulsion going through the gate, and just doing stuff that was a little bit more organic. And I mean, some people would say it's sort of abuse of the image, but just creating something a little bit magic that you can't really do in other ways. And like, to do that now digitally, you'd be needing to use some plugin or some you'd have to more construct it, or something that's been designed to do a similar kind of organic effect, whereas this is something that's really you can't really do in any other way. It was an analog kind of effect, I guess.
Now, and
that's actually something I've tried to do. Sorry, I was just going to say something I've tried on a few other projects where you want to do that with the digital sensor, still create something that has a little bit of that in camera organic sort of that magic. I tried for a while, and I really loved the look, and I haven't found a project to do it where I just found a bunch of really old stills lenses, like turn of the century stills lenses, and had to use a little magnifier inside the lens mount, and just looking through those, I just hadn't cleaned them, just left them as I found them, and so they had a lot of maybe 100 years of grit and just get these really beautiful images and amazing quality of pictures through them. It was really quite cool. I'd like to experiment with that some more, actually.
I think it would be, because like I've done something similar. Like I had one of the Blackmagic pocket cameras, and because it had the micro four thirds, I ordered a bunch of like old Russian from like the 1930s beat up lenses, and just stuck them on, and they looked it was weird because it was like you were watching a digital version of a Russian film from back then.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting, like in your own time, like what are some of the, like how do you, like it sounds like you're looking for other looks or other experiments. So how do you, like where do you look for inspiration or to come up with these new ideas?
Yeah, well, I guess there's so many sources now of
Mm-hmm.
inspiration flicking through. I mean, I do love to go to a museum or to a retrospective of a filmmaker and watch something that's we don't, not something we're seeing every day, but something
Mm-hmm.
from the past which we can learn from. But I mean, just flicking through Instagram, you get some inspiration with some of the interesting other things that other filmmakers and photographers are doing. But I do, and there's sort of with the period projects that I've been doing, I do generally go to a museum or art gallery and start looking at art that's either from the period or about that period,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with ophelia, because that's an interesting one because it's although it's not a specific period because it's
Mm-hmm.
a Shakespearean play set in a more ancient time, but or older time. But Ophelia as a character has been referenced in paintings from the
Yeah.
pre-Raphaelites to so many others. So really wanted to be aware of all of those before making our own interpretation of the character.
Mm-hmm.
And we, in that film, we've homaged some of those famous paintings of Ophelia and the pre-Raphaelite paintings. So we borrowed a lot from that. The Ancient Rome TV series I did, there's a lot of great paintings that depict scenes from ancient Rome. And so we often reference those for composition and lighting. I mean, the series that I shot, most of it was on the stage, and we'd
Mm-hmm.
built exterior locations and needed to light them as though they were exterior locations. They had open, villas with open area skylights with shafts of light
Yeah.
coming through. So looking at some of the ways that painters had depicted the light of that time was a really great source of inspiration.
Interesting.
Mm.
Now, throughout your career, you've worked in documentary, fiction, music videos. Is there, what would you say was one of the more toughest or tougher shoots that you had to take on? What made it so tough?
Yeah, I mean, it's not always the creative element that we would
Mm-hmm.
find tough. It may be other elements, whether it's some logistical challenges or yeah, I mean, there's always the difficulties with budgets are never as much as you would like to achieve something. So
Mm-hmm.
then the challenge comes up: how can we do what's in everyone's mind, but do it for a third of the price?
Yeah.
And that becomes quite tough. And I guess it's when you start to think about compromises, but then that can also lead to really interesting solutions and can come up with some great
Mm-hmm.
creative solutions that might actually be better than if you have had a infinite budget. You can come up with something quite interesting and cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I've had I think for a lot of the projects I've done, I've often ended up finding I'm doing something I haven't done in the past, so I would need to really do my homework, whether it's doing research or whether it's turning to the expertise of others and getting some advice on whether it's like the ancient Rome lighting, lighting a sound stage as an exterior, which
Mm-hmm.
that was the first time I lit such a big set. And needed to look like it was a single source of the sun, and I learned a lot doing that. And I was fortunate they gave me quite a lengthy pre-light on there, so I got to try out a whole lot of different looks, and we pre-lit that for afternoon, day, or the middle of the day, and morning and night lighting modes. That was quite a big challenge, and I learned so much and had really great people around me, so I was able to really bounce ideas back and forth. And it's not something that has, I mean, people do it all the time, but for me it was a really great learning curve to have such a big challenge to learn quite quickly on the job.
Now, how do you
Mm.
like to work with colorists? Because that's become such a big part of the job as cinematographer, because you're creating the look of the film, but now before you were just, changing, go up a stop, go down a stop, and now we're, you know, doing a full color. We can put mats everywhere. So how do you like to work with the colorist?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to work with the same colorist whenever that's possible, but that's not always possible, particularly if you're moving into different countries. But for me, it is absolutely essential to do some camera tests where we'll do some look development, where I'll shoot some, whether it's just a couple of shots or a few scenes that are some of the key looks of that project, and then go into the same coloring suite, whether it's a DI suite or the same finishing suite, and sit there with that colorist, and we look at them together. I mean, it's sort of a test run of getting to know each other. But from that experience, I'll usually set up a couple of LUTs for the show, for the film project, and those LUTs become our look. And I'm getting the DIT to pull frame grabs from every setup that we do. And I do more and more, and it's come from doing a bit of television now. I really try to, when I'm shooting with that show LUT, I really want those images to look as close to the final grade as possible for when execs are making judgments or the editors choosing which shot is going to work. I really want them to look at it in its best quality and looking closest to the finished look, so that can help with their decision making. But it also means that when I'm in the grade, it's more of a finessing or adding that little window to darken or brighten certain areas rather than reinventing the whole look of the project. There's various reasons for doing that, but I do feel like particularly with television, if you can establish that look up front, then everyone's on board and they know where you're going. There's no surprises at the end, and there's no heated discussions as to, well, really, that's not really what we thought the show was. I mean, that's already been very well established. And that's come from, I've set up a couple of TV shows, and that's become a big part of my process, is to have those tests that everyone has seen, and that's when you have the first question of, is this too dark or is this too colorful? And once all that's out of the way, you don't want to have those discussions at the end of day one's daily screening. You want to have that well in advance. So I think it is a collaboration with the colorist, and it's a relationship you set up very early on in the process.
Now I have one last question for you, and I ask this question of everyone I interview. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film to watch?
Well, I've got a lot of favorites. I think, and some of them are the obvious ones. I certainly always like to, Back to the Future is a great one, but that seems a bit obvious. I have to say, I was quite late to discover John Carpenter.
Oh my gosh, same here. He's so good.
I knew he was good when I was at film school. There's a few films that I really loved, but during lockdown, I had an opportunity to have my own John Carpenter retrospective. Like every night when the house was asleep, I would put on some of the ones I hadn't seen before, and that turned into a Dean Cundy retrospective as well. I think he was such a big part of that early John Carpenter. So I think I can throw on any one of his films and have a guilty pleasure. Yeah,
I'm in the same boat. Like, I knew about it in film school. I'd seen the key ones, right? The ones that everyone throws it, and then you just later on you're like, oh yeah, I'll check out that one. You're like, holy crap, that's really good. Like, I feel like he's respected, but I feel like he's underrated, oddly. And like, he should be higher up in the popularity or the pantheon of filmmakers. But
absolutely agree. Yeah, I think he is an artist, and what's interesting that you can see that he's trying something different with each project he does, or he's learned what works and what didn't work, and you can see the evolution of an artist looking at his films.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you this week.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.